we can think about the cell phones as a good example. A human cell, like a cell phone, requires wireless communication network.
Mm-hmm.
When the cell phone towers go down here in LA, your cell phone's useless.
So it's gone. Yeah.
Can't get grandma on the other side. Your calendar doesn't update, not getting your text messages. You're now a dysfunctional part of society because you can't get connected. That's what happens to a cell when it loses the microbiome support. And so we've been long trying to figure out, why does death of the microbiome lead to immediate human cell dysfunction? And our laboratory has been, for the last 10 years, kind of building out that big science base to show that this is how, as you're losing the wireless communication network that's made by the microbiome within you and around you. And when you lose communication, you lose repair and you lose regeneration capacity, which means you age faster.
Peace and riches blessings. I am Michael B. Beckwith, the host of Take Back Your Mind. Peace and blessings, everyone, and welcome to the podcast known as Take Back Your Mind. I am your host, Michael B. Beckwith, founder of the Agape International Spiritual Center, and it's always a privilege to meet with people every single week and have really great conversations, particularly with individuals who have in their own way taken back their mind. Their mind is not clouded with the sea of mental garbage, the status quoism of the world that we appear to be living in now, and they make a mighty difference on the planet that inspires, uplifts, helps people become the best great version of themselves. Today, I'm with Dr. Zach Bush. Welcome.
So thrilled to be with you. Thank you, Michael.
And in person, I appreciate this. If you don't know who Zach Bush is, physician specializing in internal medicine, endocrinology, hospice care, and more. Internationally recognized educator and thought leader on the microbiome as it relates to health, disease, and food systems. He founded the Seraphic Group, Angels, and the nonprofit Farmers Footprint to develop root cause solutions for human and ecological health. His passion for education reaches across many disciplines, including the role of soil and water ecosystems in human genomics, immunity, and gut-brain health. His education has highlighted the need for a radical departure from chemical farming and pharmacy, and his ongoing efforts are providing a path for consumers, farmers, and mega industries to work together for a healthy future for people and for our beloved planet Earth. Welcome.
What a pleasure to be with you.
What else would I add to this?
No, I think that overdid it probably. I got sold hard on that one. We're gonna have to lower the expectations here.
No, we know who you are. But tell us a little about your backstory, in terms of how you moved into all of these things that you're doing, your personal journey that led you to this work.
I think, backstory, I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, kind of at a turning of a major cultural event in human history that would be the late 60s, early 70s there. And there was so much awareness of the human crisis that was afoot. And so I was born right towards the tail end of the Vietnam War, and actually grew up in government housing and low-income housing and outside of Boulder, and most of my neighbors were actually displaced refugees from the Vietnam War. So they were, the Hmong people were an indigenous culture and peoples of Cambodia at the time, and they had been bombed out by Agent Orange, which is a chemical that is famous for kind of wiping out rainforests and such along the North Vietnam and Cambodia borders along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And ironically, that chemical, which is an organophosphate defoliant, is the immediate kind of cousin to the chemical that my laboratory has become expert in now, 40 years later, which is glyphosate, which is the main herbicide that our food and water systems are now contaminated with from our farming practices globally. And so in a strange way, I think my fates were picked early on to see the horror that could be played out at the human level as a child. and the displacement of people, 12,000 miles from their homes that had been destroyed utterly, and to see that same level of destruction come to our own backyards over the next 30 years, was
We're doing it to
amazing
ourselves.
things. We're now using that same chemical to destroy our own forests and water systems and all that.
And it's in people's food too.
It's in all of our food, really. Yeah, it's very difficult to find food that's undetectable in it. The more organic and the closer you get to a regenerative agricultural system that's using holistic farming practices, you get better. But unfortunately, it's a water-soluble molecule, so it's in about 85% of the rainfall. 85% of the air we breathe is contaminated with this glyphosate chemical.
It's almost karmic.
It feels a little karmic, and I think there's a sense to it that I think is interesting, and that this is what we've done as humans. And so there's a tendency in the regenerative movement to be an activist and say it's Monsanto's fault or Bayer's fault or these big chemical companies. But in reality, we did this as humans. We outsourced our entire food system to a farming industry that was dying because of a lack of labor. World War II, we sent all of our farmers to college after the war, and we didn't have farm kids anymore. And everybody was being trained into tech and industry and manufacturing, and then all of that went overseas. And so we've been steadily moving out of a labor force. And so farmers that in the United States in many areas are average age 68, 70 years old now, we've lost generations of help on those farms, and they've become more and more dependent on chemical and mechanical mechanisms to manage larger and larger acreage on their own with smaller and smaller things. So we've really got the farmers in a trap, which has the planet in a trap of chemical and technological dependence that is not in alignment with how biology and life happens.
Right. Now, how did you go from that small boy there to where you are now? I mean, did that kind of impact your mind, seeing the devastation in your own backyard?
I think very subconsciously, at that point I was a pretty happy kid growing up in Boulder. There's one of the greatest gifts in the world in some ways is poverty. When you don't have access to a lot of affluence around you, nature becomes an obvious backyard, and that can be difficult in some urban environments. But when I say nature, it's as simple as being outside. And when you live in a tiny apartment with a bunch of kids and all this, you're always outside. That's your home. And
that's where I lived.
That's where we lived.
We snuck out early in the morning, me and my brother.
We were gone until sunset, and then we'd come home for dinner. And so that was a gift. And I think that growing up in the Colorado area, a lot of outdoors, that got programmed into my cellular level that nature is an abundant giver. And if you want to have a sense of life and adventure, get plugged into that thing called nature and you'll do well. And my mother certainly endowed me with a lot of that love for adventure and hiking and high mountain stuff. And I was Boy Scout, Eagle Scout, all that stuff. So spent most of my teen years out, backpacking, hiking, building igloos, the whole thing. And so that sense of adventure, I think, got imbued in me. And so when I walked into my medical career by accident, really, I was not a good student.
By accident? You became a doctor by accident?
Yeah, it was full. It just took a left turn in Albuquerque, and suddenly you're a doctor. So you got to watch where you're going out there. But I was actually going into engineering. I was a mechanic in my teen years. My first little company I started was auto mechanics, and I knew how to turn a wrench. I knew how to build houses by the time I was in college. I was doing some building construction. And so I was a blue-collar kid. And then decided to take a year off because I got my heart broke with my first girlfriend. And as only a dramatic 19-year-old kid could be, man, I got to take a year off to recover from that, man.
That was the end of the world.
That was the end of the world back then.
That was the end of an epic in your life.
I didn't know if I was going to survive that year, honestly. I was done. I needed God to show me a new path. And that's actually exactly what happened.
So she got you into medical school.
She did.
I mean, the crisis.
Without that heartbreak, I would have changed directions. No would end out. So decided to take that year off from engineering program and ended up going to birth babies in the Philippines with a group of international midwives, and that changed my life direction.
Birth babies?
Birthing babies.
Wow. But you weren't even a doctor then.
No, I didn't know what the heck I was doing.
This is like a nonprofit organization.
Yeah, nonprofit.
You're going to assist.
Group of midwives.
So you got over your grief by service.
Yeah, I think my parents taught me that, actually. My parents are the penultimate service-oriented, community members, and still, after 50 years of marriage, that's still what they do. They are community servants, and they've served in their churches and led their churches, and they've led their community outreach. Right now, they're helping lead the food bank and the Meals on Wheels and all of the infrastructure. And we live in a very unique part of Virginia. I raised my kids in the Black Baptist Church community there, looking for kind of a way to plug into a spiritual culture that was, radically different than what I was raised in some ways, really looking for roots, because when you're out west here,
Right.
nothing existed 100 years ago.
Right.
And you go to Virginia, you've got, a community that's been living there for 400 years. My family actually landed in Virginia 400 years ago, the Bush family, and
what part of Virginia?
I was there right just south of D.C., about 2 hours. I'm now in Charlottesville area. I live in a tiny little rural area called Desmont.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I'm from D.C. originally. My family,
Okay.
my father moved me out here when I was a little boy, but we have roots in Virginia. As a matter of fact, there's a church there. I can't remember what the city is now, that Beckwith started it.
No
on my
kidding.
Beckwith side. Yeah, it still exists.
Up in Northern Virginia there?
Somewhere in North, and they
Yeah,
called me last year to see if they connect with me and see if I wanted to come take it over or something, I have to do an investigation to see what they're talking about. But yeah, so you become a doctor.
Became a doctor after that. Yeah, it was
What
long.
kind? What were you?
So I was an MD, allopathic medical doc, and initially in internal medicine was my first subspecialty, which is a lot of hospital-based care. So I was helping run the ICUs and bone marrow transplant units and all of that through my residency programs, and then as an internal medicine doc. And then from there was really craving a deeper understanding of how the body worked, because when you're stuck in ICUs and emergency rooms, you just feel like you're the finger in the dike. There's so much dysfunction, disease, and injury coming at you that is just never ending. So I was looking for something a little bit more preventative, where I could start to participate in wellness instead of just disease management. So I got into endocrinology, which is the study of hormones and the way in which the body functions. And so this covers things from bone disease, osteoporosis, arthritis conditions, all the way to solid organ things like thyroid disease, which is an autoimmune condition, diabetes type 2, which is a metabolic collapse, and then the autoimmune conditions of type 1 diabetes, adrenal, all that stuff. So I studied that hard, and that actually got me into cancer research, because I came along at a time where we were starting to realize that cancer is the result of a decrease of energy in the body.
Right. We were talking about this last night.
Yeah.
In terms of decrease of energy, loneliness, things of that particular nature. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a big change in my worldview at that point around, I was actually developing chemotherapy, and so I had a pharmaceutical model that was handed to me, and I was trying to innovate in that space of finding poisons to kill cancer cells, and ended up finding some papers around nutrients, and found that there was some evidence that maybe vitamin A compounds would work. So I started working in vitamin A as a course of action against cancer, and had some very exciting evidence under microscopes in the petri dishes and everything else in a number of different cancers, including some endocrine cancers, pituitary gland tumors and things like that didn't have any therapy for them. So a niche that needed an answer, and so I started developing in that space, and that eventually took me into the realization that nutrition was important, and I totally missed that message somewhere along 17 years in academia.
But most doctors have missed that message.
Which is just not part of our education at all.
Yeah, it's not part of the education.
Yeah, unfortunately.
They're in a whole other system. But you kind of broken out of the system.
Yeah, the food was my slippery slope for sure. So once I started thinking about nutrients as being important to prevent disease, that actually got me into the interest of starting a clinic that focused on using food as a source to reverse chronic disease, type 2 diabetes being a good example of all this. And there was about 40 years of good science saying that could be done. So I started applying those techniques, and I tried to start the clinic at the university, and it was flying in the face of the nutrition programs that were running at the university level around the food pyramid and some of the traditional ways of believing about nutrition. So I left and started my own plant-based approach to chronic disease management in rural Virginia, in a community of about 40,000 people served in a rural community in this little town of 550 people of Scottsville. So that was where I started my clinic, and worked with my patients, and they really taught me a lot of those next years. Like, I learned more from that day-to-day interaction with my patients that were really dedicated to trying to find a health path where they were taking responsibility for their health, rather than waiting for me as a doctor to give them a pharmaceutical Band-Aid. And they taught me a ton about human spirit as well as nature and the biology of wellness, which really emerged from that journey.
The food pyramid, that's really kind of a sham, isn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately, that was a marketing scheme that was put together by dairy industry, meat industry in the 1970s. And there's the fact that sugar is actually on the food pyramid is an example of how special interests can get into the mix there. It's like, don't forget about sugar. You got to have that, So yeah, it was an amalgamation of special interests in the kind of commodities crop production scene that led to that food pyramid, and there was not any real biology kind of
There's no
helped out
real
by that.
study behind it.
No.
Yeah.
It was,
I know people would talk to me about the food pyramid. I said, that's not real, man. That's just a marketing ploy. We don't eat that.
yeah, I mean, it was there to try to keep American farmers busy growing commodities crops that were new, because back in the day, every household grew that food. So
Right.
in 1945, we grew 40% of our food in our backyard victory gardens as Americans.
Right.
Today, we grow 0.01% of our
Absolutely.
food.
You're an anomaly if you have a garden.
Yeah,
And doing your own thing.
That's it. And so that's where we kind of, as a society, decided we didn't care about nutrition, and we were going to prioritize economic and comfort and convenience ultimately, and we stopped.
I like the way you put that. Yeah. So now you're coming outside of the lines.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting into nutrition. You're getting into let's go back to cancer for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because you've worked with that.
Yeah.
And what's your biggest discovery on that?
Yeah, I think there was many things that probably are not relevant to humans that I discovered around protein signaling in these mitochondria that are the energy centers within our cells. The mitochondria are known as the power plant of the human cell. But what's missed there is that they're not actually human cell elements. They're actually microbiomes. So they're actually bacteria that live inside of our cells. And and there's a lot of variation at the genetic level. So a single human cell has about, on average, 200 mitochondria. If it's a nerve cell, something in your brain, now you're talking about 2,000 mitochondria per human cell, which, multiplying that out over our cellular experience as a human body, we have about 14 quadrillion bacteria that we call mitochondria living inside of us. And our cells are packed full of these guys. It's not like 1 or 2 mitochondria per cell, which is what you see in a textbook. There's 200 mitochondria per cell. They pack the cell full. And what they're doing is they're generating light energy. And so they are doing that by breaking double carbon bonds, which are the perfect battery that nature has designed. Los Angeles is becoming a little bit famous right now for the amount of electric, cars that are here. And so everybody's plugging in. And so there's a good sense that the amount of electricity demanded to run a city like this is exponentially more complicated than running a rural community, for example.
Right.
So the larger the community gets, the more demand on the grid, the more demand for infrastructure, all of that happens. Well, that same thing happens in a cell. A mitochondria is a tiny little bacteria. And if we look at single-celled organism like a bacteria in the soil or the bacteria on my skin, that cell is so complicated in and of itself. It's a city into itself that it requires about 1,000 times more energy per cubic centimeter than the sun can produce. So the brightest thing that physics does is suns, stars. The brightest thing that biology does is a human cell. And the human cell is about 10,000 times brighter than the sun at cubic centimeter by cubic centimeter. We're light. And it takes that much energy to coordinate the complexity of multicellular life. So a single-cell bacteria, about 1,000-fold sunlight. To get to a multicellular creature like a dog or an earthworm or a human, you're at 10,000 times. And the human becomes intelligent through its ability to let nature speak through that very bright system. And so you mentioned this kind of retaking your mind as a goal of the podcast, or a lifestyle, really, of recapturing your mind. But what we're realizing is that a mind is really the expression of a super high density light structure. And so light at the cellular level is stored in water crystals inside the cell. And so in an amazing way, these mitochondria are regenerating sunlight inside your cell. And that sunlight got to you through your food.
Right.
And so
you're eating captured sunlight.
You're eating captured sunlight. And so chlorophyll are pretty famous in these green leaves that are behind us here. They're capturing light, and then they pull CO2 out of the atmosphere.
Right.
And 2 carbons from 2 CO2 molecules will be bonded together, storing just a little bit of light between those 2 carbons as a battery. So a double carbon bond is a battery storage for sunlight. As you start to string CO2 along, you get a carbohydrate, long carbon chain, or you get a fat, long carbon chain. Fat and sugars are the only resources for the cell to liberate light from. Protein doesn't work. Protein has to actually be converted by your liver into sugar before it can be
it has to be
utilized.
broken down first.
Yeah, it's not actually in itself a fuel. So sugars and fats run the human body, run any living system, bacteria all the way up. So bacteria needs that sunlight. Humans need about 10 times more light than the microbiome does per cubic centimeter. And so we're requiring an enormous amount of light energy being produced to maintain health. What my science was starting to show us in the cancer world is that as you get exposed to antibiotics, and this can be my antibiotics I give you as a doctor, but the most ubiquitous ones now are these herbicides. And so
Right.
glyphosate is the number one antibiotic on the planet. We pour about 4 billion pounds of this single antibiotic into our soils and water systems in the name of growing food. And that wipes out the microbiome of soils, so the soil energy levels are dropping on the planet, and this leads to desertification, where we lose foliage, we turn into desert, and this is happening globally now. Rivers dry up, the whole climate crisis goes. This is soil dying beneath our feet for a lack of energy, and then we start
production of oxygen.
No production ultimately of carbon, so not enough light. Right. The oxygen helps cycle that through. So oxygen, what that does, oxygen you can picture as like the foot on the accelerator pedal of carbon release. And so carbon needs to release all that sunlight. Oxygen's the foot on the accelerator pedal there. But CO2 is really the driver of life. So we've demonized it with the climate story currently, but it turns out without CO2, there's no life on Earth.
No life. Yeah.
And the higher the CO2 is in the atmosphere, the deeper the breath the Earth can take if its lungs are working. But what we've done over the last 60 years of chemical farming, really over the last 150 years with overplowing and then chemical agriculture, is we destroyed the lungs of the planet. And so we now live on a planet that's in a condition of emphysema.
Right.
It's like our planet, is that 100-year smoker and can't move the oxygen carbon across the manifold of the lung, which is its soil systems. And so we're in a condition of emphysema. In a patient with emphysema, their CO2 levels go up in their bloodstream because they can't move that through the system. In our atmosphere, we get higher levels of CO2 because we're not breathing it back in through the soil. What we've learned in medicine is if you pull CO2 out of the bloodstream of a patient with emphysema, you kill them fast because the CO2 is actually still the driver for their metabolic thing. So if you look at the symptom of CO2 in the bloodstream and say, well, maybe that's the problem, you take it out of there, you kill the patient in the ICU very quickly. Right. You screw up their acid-base situation, and so you really have to get that patient with emphysema back out of the hospital, you got to get them into such a still space where their metabolism can catch up and they can start producing enough energy to move carbon and oxygen and all that again. What we're doing on the planet right now is killing her lungs every day and then running around talking about we should remove the CO2 from the atmosphere. Right. But I can tell you as a biologist, if we do this, we're going to put this planet into a very long extinction process. If we take that CO2 and we pump it deep underground where our Earth cannot breathe it, we're going to kill this planet really deep. So we've got kind of the wrong picture around climate in the sense that it's looking at the symptom rather than cause. And I would say the same thing about my field of medicine is we're looking at cancer as if it's the cause of disease or the cause of death, when in fact it's just a manifestation of a lack of light inside the human being. So as the light deteriorates in soils, the food itself starts to carry less light. And then we call that nutrient density, and we can measure nutrient density. You can measure it in a single leaf in the farm, or you can measure it anywhere along the food chain. And so as we start eating less energy, less light, our bodies start to dim. As we dim, it becomes more and more difficult to maintain repair. Just like a city that goes through a recession, can't maintain the lines, can't do this, transformers are blowing out, flood happens, like it turns into this chaos, and you're not doing enough repair work, and the city structure is dying. And so now you have crime, and you've got hunger and disease. Everything's deteriorating. Go look at San Francisco right now. That's interesting. A city with
I remember going to San Francisco as a kid. It was
vibrant.
It was beautiful.
We
were there for vacations.
And now it's it's literally a demonstration at the city level of what a human looks like that's got cancer. It's such a low metabolic rate right now. It has so little energy potential for life in it. And so we're doing that now at the global scale as humanity is living on a planet with a dying capacity to produce light. And our diseases are simply symptoms of biology living in a diminished state of light energy.
Right. So, and in Scripture where it says we are the light that lights up every being that comes to the planet, that's not metaphor, that's not poetry, that's like biology.
It's biology. Yeah. And it says that we are also the salt of the earth. Yeah. And that's what we discovered about 12 years ago now in my laboratories, is that bacteria and fungi in our soils create a salt that is the antidote to glyphosate. And so this is a crazy situation where nature placed in her soil 60 million years ago, before the last extinction, she created a reservoir of these small carbon molecules made by bacteria and fungi that would become the method by which biology would heal her soils.
And what kind of salt is this?
60 million years later. The salt is a combination of these large carbon molecules made by bacteria when they digest food. So when they're digesting carbohydrates or fats or transitioning proteins into different structures, there's a metabolic what looks like a waste product. And so it's kind of the process of breaking things down, and you think, oh, that's the waste stream over here. Well, it turns out that waste stream functions to move information through the liquid circuit board of nature. And it binds as a salt to minerals and amino acids, which are the building blocks for life in regards to proteins and enzymes and all the manufacturing and detox systems of the body. So the salt that we found was a marriage between the quote-unquote waste products of bacteria and fungi and soil systems. Basically, they're compost, right? And so it's the compost of the bacteria and fungi that then binds in a salt-like fashion to minerals and amino acids in the soil. Your sea salt is about 64 different minerals that are binding to chloride. And so this is similar. Instead of a sea salt, this is kind of like earth salt. And so this is minerals that are binding to these carbon backbones. And by doing that, they create a liquid circuit board for information to travel through long distances. And this is how a mycelial network functions. So mycelium can move information for kilometers underneath a farm field by trafficking it through these electrical fiber optic cables. And what's moving through the fiber optic cables is electrical pulses traveling through these carbon salts. In our gut, we do the same thing. And so we create these composted mineral salts in a healthy microbiome. If we have a healthy gut system, we're building a lot of liquid transportation and communication access points for the biology to work within. As we start drinking and eating, again, 85% of the water we breathe and drains and everything else is contaminated with an herbicide or an antibiotic that's going to kill my mitochondria and wipe out the bacteria in my gut. Now my workforce is diminishing and I'm making less and less communication network. We can think about the cell phones as a good example. A human cell, like a cell phone, requires wireless communication network. When the cell phone towers go down here in LA, your cell phone's useless.
It's gone.
Can't get grandma on the other side. Your calendar doesn't update, not getting your text messages. You're now a dysfunctional part of society because you can't get connected. That's what happens to a cell when it loses the microbiome support. And so we've been long trying to figure out, why does death of the microbiome lead to immediate human cell dysfunction? And our laboratory has been, for the last 10 years, kind of building out that big science base to show that this is how, as you're losing the wireless communication network that's made by the microbiome within you and around you. And when you lose communication, you lose repair and you lose regeneration capacity, which means you age faster.
This salt you're talking about, is that like something that people can take?
Yeah. I think you're taking it every day.
That's in a gut biome?
Yeah, that's the ion products. Yeah. So, we turned it into a liquid supplement and initially rolled it out, for doctor's offices and things like that. Back in 2013, my clinic was the first to use it, and we had about 600 clinics around the country that were using it. And then by 2014, we were able to roll it out to consumers. And the pocket that we really learned with the best was our autism families around the world, because the mothers and parents of autistic children globally were some of the first to realize that their autistic children had an undermined or dysfunctional gut microbiome. Even before the doctors were talking about that, these mothers had really found that science. Some stuff had come out in Japan, and the mothers around the world grabbed onto that and were able to get that information out there quicker than the doctors were able to get it into our education. So mothers of autistic children worldwide, I think, have really been pushing the envelope and of the understanding and the science, really, of the microbiome and its relationship to our children and their capacity to have conscious communication and all of that. And so we rolled out to the autistic community in 2014-15, and those children really changed my life as a doctor. My clinic was full of kids with autism pretty quickly, and we were seeing such dramatic things happen in these children.
Just by getting the gut healthy.
Yeah, but by really giving back this wireless communication network. And so all of those cells in the body suddenly talking to each other, you find out the kid doesn't have disease. It just had a failure of communication. And when you have that failure of communication, each cell starts to become isolated. And in their isolation, there's not enough resources, and there's a sense of scarcity. And so everything downshifts its regulatory pathways and its energy force. And so the kids are surviving at this low energy expression with very high intelligence. And so what you find out with an autistic kid is you give them back wireless communication network, and you can't believe the intelligence.
They start talking.
They see the world differently.
How many autistic people have you worked on?
I think with those mineral salts, out of soil, 40,000 families within a year of us getting that on the market.
And you've seen tremendous results with this.
Tremendous results, and the results are not specific to this content. Is really specific to the household. So you get that mineral salt back in there, and the speed at which the kid is going to respond to its nature is not coming from the supplement. It's actually coming from the ecosystem around it. And so the children that were in nature, outside a lot, all of that, as soon as you gave them back the wireless communication network and that compost type structure, they immediately picked up that microbiome, and they could do miraculous things reconnected to their biology, their ecosystems. So all of this is like the cell phone tower.
Right.
And a cell phone tower has never called your grandmother.
Right.
It takes that volition of every cell to say, hey, this is what I want to do.
Right.
And the wireless communication network is just helping modulate that. So in some ways, these supplements are the very first ones on the market to not do a single thing to the human body. All your other supplements, something like vitamin D. Vitamin D turns on 2,000 different genes in your body, and it can screw up balance and all kinds of things if you take high doses of it for too long of it, whatever it is. So you can overwhelm the body with all these supplements on the market, and that's why supplements can be dangerous. The big women's health initiative showed that women on a multivitamin had 9% increase in mortality, death, being on a multivitamin over a 20-year period. Their body's taking in just a small number of nutrients at very high doses and is throwing off the balance of nature. This product line doesn't have any macrodosing of anything, and instead it's coming in to provide the communication network so the cells know what they need, and then that communication can be the facilitator. And so this is how the mycelium network, again, works in soil systems. Is not only is the information transiting that, hey, this beech tree over here on this acreage needs some selenium or silica, send silica, and so the same mycelium network that sent the message will now bring the resource. And so it's not just a communication network, it's also a highway for transportation for the resources. And that's what the microbiome does. Not only give you the information, but it will deliver whatever you require for optimal health.
And much of this that's being delivered, your body creates.
You are an ecosystem. In an ideal state, your body is always going to be your source of health. That's my conclusion after 30 years of medicine, is there is no such thing as healing that happens from outside of your body to you. You cannot heal another body. That all has to come from within. And so anything we do with drugs or radiation or surgery or whatever we're doing, that's temporizing the thing. If that person doesn't...
Symptoms only.
Yeah, it's kicking the can down the road. If that person doesn't go and pursue and discover within themselves why they got disconnected from health in the first place, they're going to manifest that disease very quickly again, or side effects from not having that organ if you chopped it out. So there's this obvious thing that nature does nature from within. The oak tree doesn't become an oak tree because of the aspen tree, right? It knows itself, and it's always going to become itself out of its own information. And so we are watching children born into this world right now that are profoundly disconnected due to their mother and grandmother being deficient in soil systems, and it compounds generationally. And so we started spraying these chemicals into our food in the 1970s. So the second generation was born in 1995, third generation born in 2015, 2020. So we're 3 generations now into glyphosate babies, and each generation you deteriorate the amount of repair and communication at the cellular level, and you see disease manifest in children very quickly now.
It's like we're probably the sickest nation in the world.
We are. Yeah, we actually have the highest death toll on day one of any developed country in the world.
And other countries won't even import our food.
Yeah, it's now illegal for Germany and many other countries. Japan was the very first to outlaw not only U.S. but any North American grains and legumes. So your chickpeas, your lentils, all those things. And so the breadbasket of Europe was quickly becoming the Ukraine. And then the war was initiated, and that shut down farming there. And now the U.S. is buying up all the farmland in Ukraine. And so are we
going to destroy Ukraine next?
Yeah, we're going to go after that soil system next. So unfortunately, we've done this worldwide as the chemical companies have really infiltrated farming globally. And so current estimates from not whistleblowers, but from government sources say that 97% of our soils that are farmable on Earth now are either depleted or severely depleted of nutrients and active carbon and all of that stuff. So the metabolic capacity or the light energy of our planet is deeply diminished, but we are the salt of the earth. And so somehow we are part of this journey of rebirth of this planet too. And so for all the damage we do, there's something we're holding that's a deep secret to why death leads to rebirth every time.
Absolutely. Now going back to the salt for a moment, you discovered this?
Yeah, our laboratory was working on that back in 2012. And
so you're the only one that has this
there.
Particular we won't call it a supplement, but you're the only one that's actually offering this to humanity at this time? Or are there
Yeah,
other
this
ones?
is the only brand that has brought that mineral amino acid combination as a salt out there. There's some of the carbon elements are used in agriculture, and there's some other supplements on the market that have tried to get them to market. But the carbon is actually pretty oxidative, and so the carbon substrate for some bacteria and fungi can cause rusting or damage to human cells. And so to get them to be non-oxidative, you have to get the mineral amino acid salts to occur with the right oxygen-hydrogen ratios and all that. So it was just a very fortunate, perfect storm of kind of seeing the potential in those molecules. And then my chemotherapy research had been right around the mitochondrial metabolism, and so had already done drug development in that space. And so I had a good sense of what salts could do across mitochondrial membrane. And so that was kind of all of that led to the idea of, can we get a very simple salt to do something really magnificent? And this gives me goosebumps every time we see a new patient grab a bottle of it, because I actually closed my clinic now, but you see clients, around the world pick up a bottle. No human's actually seen that level of intelligence in their gut before, because we've only been here 300,000 years. And to get to the level of complexity of the mineral salts that are in ion, you're looking at a soil at 60 million years old that predated the last extinction event, which was the dinosaurs and all that. That extinction happened due to a global death of topsoils. We have not had that level of topsoil density that predated that extinction since then. And so we had a huge death of topsoils. 90% of life on Earth went extinct. We struggled back for 50 million years to kind of where we were when we started this destruction of soils again. So we're manifesting the second, termination of the planet through death of the topsoil. And we find in her soils hidden back there in time the antidote to the soils of today. And so that glyphosate is the deepest wound we have on the planet right now from a chemical standpoint. At 4 billion pounds a year, there's nothing else we do at that scale.
But what do you think about the mindset of individuals who are producing this and getting? I mean, do they have any idea what they're doing?
Not at all. Yeah, I've actually worked very closely with a lot of scientists out of the chemical companies in the U.S., and I've worked with farmers for years now. And what's happened is we developed basically a chemical dependence, and so our economies got locked into the chemical industry over 100 years ago. So 1910s, we decided that we were going to basically demonize herbalism and traditional medicine and all that, and we came in with small molecule chemicals in the form of pharmaceuticals. And that would, by the 1950s, grow into chemical agriculture. And the advantage of chemical drugs is they change biology very quickly, so it can give you the appearance of progress when you don't realize accidentally you're undermining the future of biology with that chemical dependence that you've developed. And this is the same thing with caffeine or alcohol. That first drink is great. But 10 drinks in, you're a bit messed up. And so we have developed a chemical dependence as a society, and this drives not just our behavior, but also our economics. And so now there's no economic incentives to change our behavior either, because medicine, our small molecule pharmaceutical industry, is in the United States alone over a $4 trillion a year industry. Our entire military, our entire homeland security is only $800 billion, so 4 or 5 times larger than all of the military system of the United States is our pharmaceutical machine here. Globally, you're looking at like $10, $11 trillion industry. There's no company, no industry that's ever gotten those kinds of margins and that kind of revenue. So the United States GDP is absolutely dependent on our chemical dependence for pharmaceuticals, because it's driving our economic stability.
So it's a big addiction.
It's an addiction.
It's killing us.
It's a global addiction, and that gets at actually the name of your podcast. Well, addiction, it turns out, is a symptom or an expression of abandonment disorder. And so the underlying wound of humanity is we think we got abandoned by God. We think we were abandoned by nature. That's what our stories tell us. We were kicked out of the garden.
Kicked out of the garden, yeah. It's a whole nother. Peace and richest blessings. I want to ask you a question. Do you feel a deeper call within you to rise up and be a master in your life? The word mastership is extremely important. It's a word that's not used that much, but there's something within you that wants to master the use of these universal spiritual principles, that your life can become a greater expression of who and what you're meant to be. I want you to join me in my 5-week class. It's called Awake and Activate. Unlock your spiritual power. It's a 5-week dynamic course. It begins next Wednesday, by the way. I want you to join me for this class. and you're going to be a part of a community of lifelong learners, individuals from all over the world that will be taking this class with you. Why is that important? Because every individual generates a field that extends beyond the physical body. And when we join together in lifelong learning, being activated by spiritual truth, it magnifies our own field. We're able to be in a community that lifts us higher than if we did it by ourselves. The class is going to be wonderfully dynamic, infused with not only spiritual teachings, but spiritual practices and spiritual experiences that we will do together in class. You're going to learn how to use spiritual laws and principles to rise above current circumstances, conditions, situations that seem to be holding you down. You're going to be lifted beyond the polarization that's taking place in the world politically and through citizens of the world. Those conditions you're going to see are not the determining factor of your joy and happiness. That's intrinsic to you. This is going to occur in this 5-week class. I want you to join me. Next Wednesday, 6 p.m., as you come into this class and begin to become buoyant using spiritual principles, you're going to be lifted into a different feeling tone of abundance, harmonizing prosperity, because all of that is within you. You're going to receive tools for releasing guilt and shame and blame that keeps you bogged down in the past and keeps you in a sense of inertia. This universal presence designed you with a purpose. And that purpose is to reflect and to reveal this infinite nature and to keep expanding your awareness, to be a part of this grand consciousness of love and beauty and intelligence and more than your imagination can even comprehend. This is your opportunity to join me for 5 weeks. Remember, awake and activate. Unlock your spiritual power. Begins next Wednesday, October 16th. Go to agapelive.com. Look for Awake and Activate. Touch that banner. Make a commitment. And then guess what? Even before the class starts, if you make a commitment, that kind of energy starts to flow through. You start to grow, have insights and revelations even before the class starts because of your commitment to be there. Make a difference in your own life. October 16th begins a 5-week journey into greater self-realization, insight, renewal, restoration, regeneration, harmonizing prosperity, a deep sense of peace. It begins with you. Join the community. Be a part of the community and watch you grow from a glory to an even greater glory. I'm looking forward to seeing you October 16th. Peace and blessings. But I'm thinking about these individuals. At some level, you're educating people about this. And
we're doing our best.
You're doing your best to educate. But the economics, people are turning a blind eye.
Yeah, and this is the problem with activism, just saying it's glyphosate's problem or it's Bayer and Monsanto being bad guys. Farmers are using this because they have to,
yeah.
Because the economics that we built around this is keeping them locked in. So to be an American farmer today, to get the loans that you need to buy your seeds and fertilizers and chemical inputs on the front of the year, you have to have USDA crop insurance. And the chemical companies managed to get a caveat into the crop insurance that you can't get crop insurance if you're not doing GMO.
If you're not doing this stuff.
Yeah, so if you're not doing the chemical dependence, you don't get crop insurance. If you don't get crop insurance, you don't get the bank loan to do your inputs. And so it's a financial trap that our farmers have gotten into. And this compounds what was a labor crisis that they had by the 1950s. And so when all the GIs came back from World War II and all went into attack and they all went to their GI bills and went to the universities and all that, none of them came back to the farms.
Nobody farmed anymore.
And so we had a collapse of labor that was met by technology and small molecule manipulation of nature. We called it the Green Revolution. You could dump in a bunch of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, fertilizer on the soil, and your plants grew green.
Right.
Well, that's amazing. But pretty soon they were so overwhelmed by weeds and pests that we had to create herbicides, pesticides, and all this. So again, we created chemical dependence through shortcutting biology instead of taking care of the soil. we had the soil in an ICU. And what you know, if you've ever been in an ICU, and it's a terrible place to be, but the likelihood of surviving the ICU goes down radically every single day you're in there.
Yeah.
And so if you didn't get out by day 3, your chance of getting out at day 6 is radically lower.
Right.
And so there's this diminishing likelihood that you're going to find health in the artificial environment of an ICU, where we've taken over your nutrition with tubes down your throat, and we're putting it in your intestine, or if that fails, then we're putting nutrients into your veins with IVs, and we've taken over your heart rate and your respiratory rate. We got you in a breathing machine. We're doing everything for you. Your likelihood of bouncing back out of there diminishes by the hour. And so there's always this race in the first 24 or 48 hours in an ICU of, can you get whatever underlying thing was there stabilized and get that person off the breathing machine quick enough before they die from complications of just being in the treatment. This is where we are as a planet now. We have a planet in ICU care where we're putting in intravenous injections of nutrients into soils globally, trying to keep a dying planet alive without asking that deeper question of, why is it dying?
Right. But you know this, and a lot of people know this.
Farmers know it.
Farmers know it, but there's no recourse?
There's recourse, but it takes cooperation. And the challenge there is we don't communicate. And so without communication, you can't have cooperation. And right now, the people in our country that are making decisions are largely on the coast. And they're economic decisions, California, New York, whatever. You're making economic and regulatory decisions that are affecting the middle of this country that gets no voice in that. And that's been happening for 100 years or more. And so you have the generative engine of energy for this country died a long time ago with a lack of communication.
Right.
Those farmers can get back on course within just a single season. From fall to spring, they can get on track if we come alongside of them and share the risk. And so we as a community, as a single community, we can do this. We can say, you know what, we're going to partner with our farmers, and we're going to bring capital to them so they don't have to rely on bank loans and USDA crop insurance.
When
We're
you say,
you know,
who are you talking about?
It can be a citizen, it can be a group on your block even. But Biome Capital Partners is my private equity firm that we've been spinning this up for a few years now. How do we sit down with farmers? And we've been listening for 3 years to farmers all over the country to understand the problems that they've got to actually get themselves profitable. And to own their land again is a big piece of this, because most farmers lease land, which is fine if you're commodities cropping, you spray chemicals and you get a crop out. But if you're doing good management of your soil and you're a regenerative organic farmer, you're building soil as your main asset. And if that land then gets sold off in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, you just lost 8, 10 years of work, and it's going to take a new piece of land 3, 5, 10 years to recover. And so farmers, if they're going to do the right thing by their soil and invest in life, are going to need to have a stake in the soil again. And so that's where we need to adjust our global economics, not just in the U.S., but globally. We need to start coming along farmers and say, you know what, how can we help you invest in land? How can I buy food directly from you and cut all the middlemen out?
Farmers markets and things like that. Possibly.
Farmers market, CSAs, and just new economic structures of relationship that we can do by our cell phones and all kinds of things. They're there. Solutions have been invented. They're just not being used.
It's not being used.
And it's because of that failure of communication also. We got to start driving out of our cities. Our electric cars can't get too far, but we got to drive out far enough to find a farmer that's actually working the earth still, and sit down with them and be like, you know, how can we cooperate? And if our
and getting people to grow gardens again.
We got to go to our
Remember
backyards.
they tried to make that illegal in California?
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, the big supermarkets or whoever was controlling that was trying to pass a law that we couldn't grow our own vegetables in our backyard. It didn't pass, but they were trying.
Yeah, and well, that's resurfaced in just the last 12 months. So there is an effort to control the food system, you know, and that's big business. It's you know, just in the U.S. alone, that's a $2 trillion business. So it's half the size of our pharmaceutical industry. But you add pharmaceuticals and agricultural farming together, you got a $6-7 trillion industry just in the U.S. alone. So our GDP is only 17 trillion. So we're talking about 20-30% of our entire GDP is relying on our chemical dependence right now. And so we're going to have to transition our entire economy back to biology. We got to leave chemistry and go back to biology if we're going to survive.
Now, what would you tell people in terms of what could people do right now in terms of the longevity? Break down longevity, but what can you share with them along those lines?
Yeah. This actually became a huge focus in my clinic. What we were watching is the rise of biohacking as a movement, and this was basically telling people that with enough technology and enough data, you can be healthy. And by this time, I was already seeing in my clinic the opposite, is that overwhelming them with data, imaging, laboratories, electrical energy measurements, the whole thing. It was distracting them from the source of life, which sits within them. And so the biohacking community, with all of its technology, is just replacing the medical doctor community, saying, here's all these small molecule pharmaceuticals for. Both of them are offering external resources with the promise of health and longevity. And what we are quickly learning is that there's only two futures for humanity. One is technologic, and one is biologic. And if we continue to go down the path that we're on, that we believe there's a technology for every dis-ease or discomfort or pain we might have, we're going to lead ourselves into a dystopian extinction event. We have to start to transition our children's dreams towards a biologic future. What does a living city look like?
Yeah.
When was the last time we asked our kids that? What does a living system look like? What does a living city look like? What does a household built around living systems look like? What if every house was required in its design to produce more food, water, and electricity than any other than it uses? What if there was just abundance at the level of a single household? And this was proven possible by a brilliant friend of mine, Joost Bakker, out in Australia, when he built what's called the Future Food Systems, which is a 3-bedroom house that produces more water, food, and energy than it requires. And he did this off-grid in the middle of Melbourne. There is zero waste.
Yeah.
So he plopped it down with no connections to municipal waste systems or whatever, and they used all the fecal mass to generate gas for the stoves that we're cooking on. I mean, it is a closed-loop system.
Yes.
And it produced more food than they could. They got 400,000 school kids or something like that through this thing in a year to tour this thing and redream the future.
Right.
Because when we start realizing that this is
there's a
possible,
house like that out in Malibu.
Is there?
There's a company building those, and they're trying to get capital to and there's no waste. Everything that you just described, I went and I walked through it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
It's been done.
It's prefab. It's prefab.
It's prefab, and it's something that is there. And Joost has open sourced that plan. You can see the documentary. It's called Future Food Systems, I think, is the documentary. But the fact is, we have the ingenuity to understand that there is a biologic future to this world that includes humans. and so we can do that.
Not just ants.
Yeah,
humans can't survive.
And we can evolve. We can really transform. And as we start to understand the disease we've created by our disconnect from nature, it gives us a very obvious path forward of reconnection to nature. It could take us places we can't imagine. Because we've actually been exiting nature for a very long time.
Long time. Now tell us about your products. We talk about the ion gut health, which I take every day.
Yeah.
And I won't go without that. That's just a part of what I do.
Yeah.
Tell us about that, and tell us about some of the other things that you got going on.
So the ion products are based on those earth salts that we were talking about, the carbon with the mineral amino acid complexes, and so that's a 3-time-a-day supplements, liquid based. The gut health one was our tip of the spear, but we have a bunch of products coming out in these next few months. The skin one is the fastest way to understand what it does. You just spray your skin down with the skin formula, and you'll see changes you feel it within minutes, but you'll see the change within a day or two. And so starting to watch that in a clinical trial, it was 70% of people experienced less, dark sunspots and wrinkles and all of that. And so they're seeing that reversal of sun damage very quickly because the body is now communicating damage. And so when you get cell-cell communication, the body simply goes into a higher rate of repair, and you see that reversal. And so the skin one is an easy way to actually witness what's happening, whereas the gut one, it's something you feel over the course of a few days, weeks, months, when your body is starting to increase its energetic reservoir. And so that's really what this thing is doing slowly, is rebuilding that reservoir for coping mechanisms for injury and accelerating your rate of repair across the whole system.
So when I asked you the question, what we could do for longevity, this is one of the things we could do.
Yeah, it's really about it. I mean, the one sentence is really kind of, can you get back in touch with biology? And the gut is the very beginning of that. And then I would say that the other elements of longevity would be what we've been working on in our 8-week program, each week kind of focusing on another thing. But once you redevelop a sense of self-identity, then you can start to develop a new relationship to food, gut health, new relationship to breath. We all tend to overbreathe, and so with a lack of, again, that carbon-oxygen exchange, it dims our body. with breath work and breath practices, you can accelerate and elevate the amount of light energy you're producing in your body just through breath.
Right.
So you correct food, and then you correct breath, and then you correct something which might be unexpected, which is fasting.
Yes.
And your relationship with fasting, again, makes you a brighter being. It
Yes.
accelerates metabolism through unexpected ways. And then you have to exchange your expression in play. Because if you're not playing, no matter what we do, you still are diminishing light.
Right.
And so play becomes this unexpected, beautiful asset within life. And if you don't have a friend that makes you just laugh like you can't breathe, then you need to go find one of those, because laughter is one of the most profound medicines that we've ever found on this planet.
Absolutely. We have a laughter
transforms us.
ministry at Agape.
Get out.
It's
Tell
called
me about that.
It's called Laughter Yoga. And they meet once a week and laugh and play.
That's it.
There's a practitioner by the name of Martin Weech, and that's what he does.
I love
And
this.
so people tune in. I mean, now it's, Zoom. It used to be in person, still in person, but people zoom in from all around the world. And Martin, he's a funny guy. You know what I mean? He's funny. And so he leads people in belly laughing, just different kinds of laughter to spark the cascade of tonic chemicals flowing through the body and all of that. Yeah, it's pretty much every week.
Yeah.
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 For years it's been going on.
And that's some of the most ancient proverbs and everything else, is the one that kind of makes that accelerated jump to what we might call heaven. These high states of ecstasy are those that have a heart as light as a feather.
Yeah.
And there's nothing like laughter to get your heart as light as that feather
absolutely.
again.
People call me silly. I don't get through a day without being called silly. I try to act like I'm serious, but
don't try too hard.
I know.
It's overrated.
Yeah. We just laugh. You talked about nutrition, laughter. I created a word years ago called plevolving, evolving while playing. Plevolving. so that even when you're doing something work related, you look at it as play. You're fully involved, but you don't have an attachment to an outcome, and you're playing at it. So that's you end up evolving when you hold that high state that you're talking about.
And that's how we learn the best, right?
Yeah.
Children learn through play.
Yeah.
And you stick them in a school and make them sit still all day, they have a hell of a hard time learning.
That's the antithesis of a real way to learn.
But you put them in motion into an experiential learning environment of play.
Yeah.
They're a sponge.
Absolutely.
And this is I think where we need to go as a global society. We need to stop educating our children. We need to start letting them learn.
Yeah.
And experiential learning will put us on a whole different path, especially if we let nature be their teachers.
Right.
And so
Are you still optimistic? I mean, you ran down a lot of stuff here today.
we need death to rebirth.
Uh-huh.
I'm very optimistic we're about to rebirth, because we are doing a lot of death right now.
So there's a lot of things. There are issues, and all the systems are dying right now. They don't work.
It's perfect somehow.
It's perfect. So the solutions already exist on the planet.
I'm convinced. I really believe this is a law of nature, is that there is no injury that's ever allowed to occur that doesn't already have a solution.
Absolutely.
And so nature has to have an antidote to every injury that comes along.
Right.
And I've been trying to innovate in this space. So to give you a sense of how all of you can start to play in this space is, as we started looking at the second largest problem, once we found out that nature had a solution for glyphosate, we're like, okay, well, what's the second largest problem? And it's microplastics. And so the microplastics are destroying our endocrine systems, and our children in the womb now are having a hard time gendering. And so the masculine and feminine doesn't develop inside the womb now because of the amount of chemical herbicides, pesticides, and microplastics that the womb is exposed to. Right. And so we have an endocrine environment where masculine and feminine is not differentiating, and so we see the collapse of fertility, we see the collapse of gender expression, we see all of this happening. And so this is the ultimate kind of dissolution of a species, if you will.
Yeah.
But the exciting thing that we see coming out of that is when you stop polarizing your sense of identity, and and what we're seeing in these children that are coming along in this next generation is they love differently.
Yeah.
They have a more open heart, a more open mind.
And they accept everybody.
They accept everybody, and that's what they're asking us to do. Is can you just accept us for whatever we're expressing?
Absolutely.
Right now, we're expressing 40 generations of trauma and the last 150 years of chemical, disruption. That's what we're expressing to you. This is what it looks like. Is a lot of trauma.
Right.
And we're starting to find out that we can't pass that on, because our fertility is so low now. 1 in 3 males around the planet is now infertile by sperm count. We could be at sperm counts of 0 by 2040, 2050.
Yeah.
And so we're looking at
the population is declining.
The population
all around the world, less and less
except for
babies
Africa.
are being born.
Africa, India is starting to plateau. It was a stronghold, but other than the African continent, our populations are plateauing or shrinking. And so we're in this
In Japan,
downward spiral.
we might have any
Oh my
people
God.
there.
Yeah, China's in a huge negative growth spiral right now.
Right.
And so China's collapsing, population in Japan, I was just told in the headline yesterday, 30 million empty homes by 2030 just because there's no longer people to live there. 30 million
I know,
empty homes.
because I was reading an article where they're inviting people to come to live in Japan and to marry people and to have babies, giving big dividends to do so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is what the U.S. will be doing soon. Is we're going to try to get people back in here at some point. Right now, we're so fascinated by robots and electric cars and 5G networks in the sky.
5G.
But the reality is all we're doing is kicking the can down the road to realizing, well, we chose a technologic future when really what we want in our hearts was a biologic future.
Right. Absolutely.
And so we feel that future. We know that future is possible. And so I get excited about this generation of children right now because they have decided to be the wall. Mm-hmm. We are not going to pass on the genetics of 40 generations or 400 generations of trauma. What are we going to realign to? Mm-hmm. And then ultimately, we have to realign to the soul print rather than the genetic imprint.
Right.
And so there's actually something that predated your genetics.
Here,
So before your genetics in the womb of your mother was an energy field.
Right.
And biology began to line up along that design, and you built yourself a human body out of that.
Right.
But that soul print predated the cells, else the cells would not have known how to migrate and do what they do. And my last subspecialty after endocrinology, I actually left the university in 2010, started my nutrition clinic, was making absolutely no money, so I needed a part-time job, so I became a hospice doctor. And I was admitting 80 patients a week to die. And I never saw a death that didn't look like a complete rebirth. Mm-hmm. And I saw the most beautiful things come out of those last few breaths of life over and over and over again. And I now believe humanity's on our hospice bed, and we have a few breaths left to take, maybe a couple decades left to breathe as a species in our current form. And what you get to see as you start to let go of the biology we're currently expressing is that person can leave the body, come back with information, and come back to live a new life. 10% of our patients on hospice have to be discharged because they find new life. And their diseases
and they
go
know
away,
the real meaning of life.
They know their
their
purpose.
loving.
And ultimately what happened when they left the body for a moment and came back with new information is they lost fear, guilt, and shame.
Right.
If you lose those three, your whole genomic system changes.
Right.
So you realign.
Speaking exactly my sermons.
I'm wasting everybody's time here.
No, you're not. You've added so much value in science and articulation.
Just prove that Michael Beckwith's been true for 30 years. Get to church, y'all.
It's funny. There's a guy I know who thought he was coming to years ago. He thought he was coming to Agape because he heard me say something about Mother, Father, God, the divine feminine. And he says, "Oh, I know why I'm here. I got to get this guy straight." So he did a plant medicine journey and went and he discovered why he was, why he was such a bad guy in the world, and discovered he had been sexually abused and all of this. And he came back after his trip. He says, "Michael, you're right."
That's right.
Everything you're saying has been true. I said, "Yeah, I know that. Now you do." I said, "Because I'm going from the source here.
Yeah.
It's not my opinion."
And that's exactly what we have to do now. As our biology fails, we have to realign with source. The original information that came through to knit you together in your mother's womb is still available to you.
Absolutely.
And so I've got on my website, I've got a little meditation. It takes 15 minutes to do kind of a simple version of this, and you can get it much more complicated with the visual work, but it's called The Anatomy of the Soul, and it takes you through a guided meditation out of the body to your soul imprint so you can bring that back into the body. So it's beautiful. A quick way to access the information that people will always access as they start to lose the biologic connection to life. And so you can do that while you're in the body still and bring that information back in. So I'm finding it to be a very potent technique for what does it feel like to realign to your original math instead of keep lining up with the trauma that you inherited from mom and dad.
Absolutely.
And so our genetic tree is too toxic, too much trauma to keep life going. And so this generation that's coming in right now to maybe be one of the last in our current expression is saying, no, this is where it ends. We're going to love differently. We're going to see each other wholly. We're not going to expect the same things. These kids coming in, strangest thing is they're not getting their driver's license. Like,
I know it.
What is that?
What is that? My grandson. He's in college. He doesn't have a driver's license.
I still haven't figured that one out. But along that,
they're Ubering.
They're Ubering,
and being driven around.
Exactly. They figured out they could have a chauffeur. But so they're taking this different tact on life where they see freedom not in their driver's license, that was my reason I was there on my 16th birthday.
Right.
So I could have freedom.
Yeah, me too. Get that car.
I think they're having a sense of freedom or a sense of identity that's not relying on the mobility of a car to give them that sense of self and their self-expression. And so there's something happening in this generation that says, we're going to align to a different value system.
Right.
And along that, we see them not engaging sexually in the same way.
Right.
A lot less sex being practiced by teenage kids than maybe every time in history. But it's interesting that as our gender,
but their loving and acceptance is very high.
High.
Yeah.
And so we used to use a physical expression of
right.
connectivity that we would call sex. They're learning how to do that, like that psycho-emotional level differently.
Yeah. It's more evolved.
And it's difficult. That's why so many are struggling with anxiety, depression, psychotic disorders, all of that. And this is rampant right now because they are feeling so much.
Yeah.
And I think this is the gamut that we now have to run as humanity. Are you really willing to feel what we have done to ourselves?
Right.
Are you willing to suffer that kind of level of disconnect so that you can find your way through the wound?
Yeah.
These children are taking us through the wound, and an autistic child does this so beautifully. And I have seen children all over this world heal their families by showing the families what the level of dissonance is in their own mind. A child with autism is simply showing the family what the cognitive dissonance and disorder is in the minds of all those that live in that home. And so our autistic community globally is showing us our collective disorder, our collective unease. But we have the egoic mind and all these social norms that we're willing to hide it all behind. So it looks like we're okay.
Right. I'm fine.
But we're feeling exactly like an autistic child is acting. And so the autistic child is showing us the current human condition. And the amazing thing is you plug them back into nature and their whole family begins to heal, finding their root causes. And that child starts to need less and less demonstration of the dis-ease and starts to demonstrate joy. An autistic child who's gone through that healing journey, I've got a 2-hour one with these 2 boys that grew up in my clinic with their mothers on my Global Health Education Summit. It's free on my website. Go to the autism one there, and you're going to find these 2 mothers, first of all, saints. Any mother of an autistic child globally, you are an angel among us. The amount of emotional, psycho-emotional, spiritual strife of a mother watching their child suffer at this level is just immeasurable. And so my heart, my tears go out to every mother that's there, and I just hope that you find community around you soon, because I know how lonely a journey that can be. But as you see a child recover from that, you just can't capture the amount of joy that's in that child. And so that child's gone from showing the suffering to showing the joy of their mother and their father, as their mother and father have been realigned with a different structure of priorities, of value systems and all that, because the family had to align with the child. You never heal autism by getting a kid to fit into our current society. that pushes them the wrong direction. Absolutely. So you're forcing them into the existing human structures, they get worse. You let them guide the path for the family, for the household, for the community around them. And then you see that healing journey, and they start to express unfettered joy. Wow. And that's what we all have with the capacity to express.
We go to the source. You reminded me of a few years ago, on a particular Sunday, all of these autistic children came to Agape. They didn't know each other. They were coming from different parts of the United States. And they said they heard a call to come. And some of these guys were talking to our ministers, and they're saying, "We know you. You're Kathleen. You have red hair. We dream about you." I mean, it was like amazing. They just showed up, and they said they were in tune with our energy as a community.
Wow.
And they just showed up at Agape. And it was just like, we just kind of had a party, and we just kind of talked and hugged, and they were telling us stuff about ourselves. They didn't know us personally, but they knew us from their dream state. It was an amazing situation. We're still in touch with a lot of them. Yeah,
it's spectacular.
I know, it's amazing. But you know what? I want to talk about your products.
All right.
Because I just want you to know, I take Ion Gut Health. I mean, it's part of my regimen. And for a limited time, you can Take Back Your Mind listeners can receive 20% off of their order by using a special one-time discount code. It's in the show notes. So when you go to the show notes, you'll see how to get Ion Gut Health 20% off for a limited period of time. Does that include the other products or just the gut health?
Yeah, it should have all of the options there. It'll have your skin sprays and ones for the pets too, I think should probably be on there as well. So the pet stuff is important. The pet food that we have on the market now has about 100 times more glyphosate than even the human food does. So the pets are really under the gun of these herbicides.
Wow. And so does this assist in getting this out of a person's system?
The body does that naturally, and so the body
detoxes. What about the microplastics?
Everything, really. I mean, the body is a detox machine. So
Right.
when you restore communication,
Yeah.
the body just does what it does better.
Right.
And so the product itself doesn't need to do anything to you again.
It just puts you back in homeostasis.
It's the passive thing that it's like all the wireless cell phone towers turning back on. Suddenly all the cells work. And so all the cells are now talking, hey, we got problems over here. We need this, we need that. And the whole system starts going. And we've been able to demonstrate this is the first product with no calories that increases the light energy in the cell.
Oh, that's powerful.
And so this takes the mitochondrial metabolism or potential within every single cell to this higher level within seconds of exposure. So you're really turning the lights back on in the system. And so the energy is going up, your communication network is rising, the available resources at the body level to do any kind of repair has simply increased because you've reconnected biology. And so if we reconnect humans to ancient source information within the planet, we see biology that's never happened before. And again, when you take this product, humans have only been here 300,000 years. You've never seen this level of soil intelligence. It's never happened in human biology. And so I get these goosebumps moments of this nature has stored information that wants us to become something we've never become before. So how do we escape extinction? We're going to have to turn on the lights brighter than they've ever been bright. So we're going to have to breathe more. We're going to have to get out in nature more. We're going to have to reconnect to our play and our laughter and our joy. We're going to have to reconnect ultimately to our heart centers and live from there rather than from the trauma of our genetics.
Absolutely. That was it right there. That was it right there. That's it. So 20% off. You can get this at the stores, but you might as well get your 20% off by going to the show notes and getting it now. And I've never really pressed anything other than my own product. Get the Eye on Gut Health. I take it every day. I don't even know how I even found out about it, but I remember getting the bottle and I just felt like this is really special, And then I got my family on it, and
I've had some pretty amazing experiences with that. Actually, I was in Africa last year, and there was a Kalahari Bushman there who, is speaking with the clicks and the tongues and everything. You've seen the Kalahari in films and things like this. This is one of the most ancient human consciousnesses on the planet. And I didn't even show him the bottle. What I did is we were in the dark backyard, and I asked him to put out his hand, and I poured just maybe a teaspoon of the liquids into his hand, and I asked him what he thought it was. And he sat there for maybe 3 or 4 minutes without talking. He just was kind of rolling it in the palm of his hand. And then he smelled it, and then he doesn't. To me, it smells like water. It has no scent, no taste. He's just feeling. He says, "This is not water." He says, "This is much heavier than water." And then he goes on to start describing his version of minerals and what metal is, what the earth uses to move energy through metal and all this. He had this amazing description. Literally, through the palm of his hand, he did a better job describing the molecular function of this thing than I did in 10 years in my laboratory with all of our equipment. And so it reminds me that as you picked up that bottle and you sensed something, we are quantum computers. And the only laboratory that's important to you is your own body. Your body knows the truth. It knows where you come from. It knows the original design. And if you start to trust that, that's where this intrinsic health begins to kick in. And so if you all are listening to this and wanting a community around you, we have an intrinsic health community now globally.
Oh, tell them all about how they can contact you and websites, everything.
Sure.
Anything else we've forgotten?
Yeah, journeyofintrinsichealth.com is the website for that. If you want, all the stuff I do is simple with my name, zachbushmd.com. That'll access all of our companies and products and resources, the nonprofits, farmersfootprint.us if you want to support farmers in this country as we begin to rebuild the systems here, farmersfootprint.us. If you're in a family office or investment space, biomecapitalpartners.com, that can get you engaged to really start to invest in farming globally again and start to reconnect ourselves. But ultimately, to really, begin this journey with me, I feel like we just all need to go outside this weekend. We need to just get out on a trail somewhere. We need to get out in nature. We need to just ask the mother, how can I participate? How can I play again? I forgot you were here. I forgot I'm part of you. And let's just acknowledge that we forgot that. And in our remembrance of the fact that we are earthlings at this moment.
I was getting ready to say that. Spiritual beings have an earthling incarnation.
We are human at this moment. And that's precious. And that's precious.
It's sweet. I remember an old story of how precious being a human being is. And the story goes that, you probably know the story, that if a turtle were to go underwater, if there was an inner tube, and if a turtle were to go underwater and every 1,000 years pokes his head up the odds of that turtle poking his head up into that inner tube is greater than having a human incarnation. That's how precious having a human incarnation is.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Well, I think that inspires us all to just consider the precious thing that it is to take a breath in these bodies. And
Absolutely.
that's what I see in hospice all the time, is
Right.
that it doesn't matter what disease brings you to that end, whatever path you walk, to take those last few breaths. There's something called Kussmaul breathing that happens. And
right.
It's this moment where the patient's pretty much unconscious at this point and will suddenly stop breathing for as much as a couple minutes, and then suddenly take the biggest breath you've ever seen a human take.
Mm-hmm.
And they take this huge, almost violent, giant breath, and then they slowly exhale that huge breath in, and they'll breathe like that, these massive breaths. And you don't even know how they have muscle strength to do this, because they haven't been able to move. And now they're taking these massive breaths, more than an athlete would do, massive breaths for 3 or 4 minutes, and then they just stop breathing. And you think, oh, maybe they're dead. Wow, that was amazing. And then they start breathing again. And the neurochemistry is interesting to Kussmaul breathing, but the spiritual ramifications are fascinating to me. Is the last thing we do when we are connected to body is remember how good it feels to breathe.
Wow.
And so that's the last thing we're going to do, is we're going to take the biggest breaths we've ever taken.
Right.
And we're going to remember our connection to the oxygen, to the carbon, to the nature that made us human at that moment.
Right.
And so it's an invitation for all of us to breathe deeper today before we're dying, and take that deep breath and be alive.
Take that deep breath and be alive. Zach, thank you so much for being here, man.
Pleasure to be with you,
Appreciate
Michael.
you, man.
Real appreciation.
Good hanging out with you for dinner last night as well.
I love
So
that.
good. So listen, this has been Zach Bush. He's given you all the ways that you can connect with him. If you want to experiment with the Ion Gut Health, in the show notes is how you can get 20% off of this particular product and the other products as well. And I'm going to say you're gonna love it. You're gonna love it, and your body's gonna love it. And until we see each other again, have a beautiful and bright day. Monitor your awareness. Establish an intention of what you are becoming. That radical state between being and becoming. Let yourself become a greater vision of yourself. Peace and blessings. Peace and blessings, and welcome to the Way of Meditation segment here on your Take Back Your Mind podcast. You know by now that meditation for me is extremely important. I have a meditation service prior to every service we have at Agape. And then I also have a Way of Meditation service every Sunday at 6:45 a.m. Pacific time, dedicated to just teaching and practicing meditation. Meditation is infused as a fundamental practice in our teachings and primarily in our practice. I want you to think about something. Think about a moment in which you perhaps were sleeping, but you knew you had to wake up at a particular period of time in order to get to a meeting or something fun, but you didn't set your alarm clock. And then somewhere in the dream state, as you were sleeping, you woke yourself up. You said, oh, I gotta wake up before I miss my appointment, or I miss my date, or I miss my great time. And you kind of gave yourself a signal, and then a few moments later you woke up, and you woke up on time without an alarm clock. Meditation is like that. You're actually giving yourself a signal to wake up. When you turn within and pull your attention away from the world and its distractions, and you have an intention to become a greater version of yourself, to express more life, more love, more beauty, more joy, more creativity, to discover the great mystery of your being underlying all phenomena beyond your conditioned self, you're actually sending out a signal the same way you would do in a dream state to say, I gotta wake up in time. You're actually telling yourself, it's time to wake up, you see. So you're not trying to add anything to yourself. You're simply eliminating that which does not intrinsically belong to you. Meditation is a great mind fast. I used to call meditation the mind fast for years. It just popped back into my awareness. Because when you're fasting from the world of distractions and effects, circumstances and situations, starts to detox itself. And you start to eliminate that which no longer serves you. Okay, that's my 2-minute and 40-second introduction into meditation for today. My 2-minute Dharma talk. Let's turn within and practice. Feet on the ground, back straight, but not erect, but not rigid. Slight smile on the face, slight smile. So your body temple begins to produce tonic chemicals. Makes your immune system stronger. Blood pressure more healthy. And as we're sitting here in the silence, there's stillness, there's silence, there's solitude. SSS. We give ourselves permission to be still. Even if the body wants to get up and walk around and be active, no, you have dominion over the body. Just tell it to be still. You be still. Come into a level of silence. And you begin to come into your sacred solitude. A deep sense of aloneness, which really means all oneness. And you imagine for a moment that someone is about to tell you something extremely important. And so your whole being leans into listening, lowly listening, but not with your ears necessarily. Your whole being is available. That in consciousness you'll be able to catch the eternal whisperings of pure spirit. Let there be light and love and beauty and life. Let it be. You hear it in your own way. Stillness, silent, solitude. You're sending out a wake-up call. You say, it's time to wake up now. It's time to wake up. And in this consciousness of waking up, the vibrational word is spoken for each and every one of us that we may be free today, spiritually liberated, and that our life begins to take on the vibration, the frequency, the tenor, and the glow of joy and gratitude, thanksgiving, and dynamic appreciation, with a deep feeling tone that all of our needs are met right now. We feel it. It is now becoming our new law. And so it is. Amen. Peace and blessings. I truly hope that you are enjoying Take Back Your Mind podcast. The Take Back Your Mind podcast is sponsored primarily by the Agape International Spiritual Center. In other words, everything that you see in terms of the staff that puts this together, the editing, the equipment, all of this is sponsored by our Agape International Spiritual Center. So if you are enjoying the podcast, I'm inviting you to support the sponsor. Support Agape. Simply go to agapelive.com and make a donation. And say in the donation that you are supporting the podcast. It allows us to keep broadcasting. It allows us to keep putting these magnificent moments together with these wonderful people that I get to interview. We keep having the possibility of updating the equipment that's necessary and providing the wonderful content that many of you are writing in and saying, I really love the podcast. Support the podcast. Support the sponsor. Agape International Spiritual Center. agapelive.com. You can also text to donate. You can text the word give to 424-321-6243 and put podcast so that we know that you're really supporting this wonderful podcast. Our secondary sponsor is AdaptoZen, ADAPTOZEN. This is my superfood greens. It's nutritionally dense because I teach spirit, mind, and body. We want our body temples to be healthy. So one of the products is my superfood greens. You can go to NutraRise.com. Those three little lines you see, you hit those three little lines and you'll see AdaptoZen. There's two products, my superfood greens and a product called Elevate, which are organic mushrooms for your health. You can put both in your smoothies so that you have main ingredients for the health of your body temple. These are our sponsors. Primary sponsor, Agape International Spiritual Center. Secondary sponsor, AdaptoZen. I want you to be healthy. I want you to be wise. Circulate and share. Peace and blessings. Your time is very valuable, so I want to thank you for lending us your ear and participating in taking back your mind. If you want to submit a question for the question of the week, please submit it to podcast@michaelbeckwith.com. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, please submit a review and let us know your thoughts. Stay on top of current episodes by subscribing to the podcast so that you'll receive alerts and not miss one single episode. And feel free to share this podcast with all of your friends and family. And until we meet again, take back your mind and you will take back your life. Peace and blessings.